I'll read one verse of Scripture from the 6th chapter of Mark's Gospel, the 4th verse. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." The Word of God for God's people. Be seated, if you will. When I was a little boy, my family lived in Mobile for a number of years, and moved there when I was 5 years old. And there was a creek that ran by our house in Mobile. And from the time I moved there, I was fascinated by that creek. As we stayed there longer, the more fascinated I got. And when my mother saw my eyes bulging out, she made some rules. And one of those rules is that we go near the creek enough to see it and enjoy the fact that we're close to it, but we don't go in the creek because you're just not ready for that. And I didn't swim that well and so on. So I heard that. I did. But I got a little closer. I would walk like this, and then every once in a while I would walk a little bit closer and then take it, this way, and then a little bit this way, and zigzag, got a little bit closer. Technically, still not at the creek, but closer. And then one day I dared put my hands in it, squatted down. Oh, and I loved it. Squish and mud and tadpoles and crawfish and every kind of stuff. I just loved it, Thought I could get away with that because I was cool. I had it down. Me in the creek, just like that. And then one day, thunk, I fell in, soaked to the gills, panicky, not so much because I was in the creek, but because of what I knew lay ahead. Well, I thought about many things. I thought if I had a knapsack handy, I'd run away. If I could be introduced to a home in the area that I could go into, like one of my friends, I would go into it, but I knew that one of their mothers would call my mother, and it would be worse than if I just went home. So finally, I just went home. Now, you got to know, went to the back door, and led into the kitchen. And this is home. I'm in and out all the time. But this time, I stood there dripping wet, and I rang the doorbell. I rang the doorbell. And I just stood there, What do you want for your last meal? That kind of thing. And my mother came to the door, and she opened it, and she looked down. So I went in, stood in the kitchen. She went and got a towel to dry me off, new clothes, dry clothes to put on me, got all that set up, and then I went into a little back room, and she got out her famous switch. And the backs of my calves stung, and it was painful, and I cried. And then she said, "We don't do that again." No, we don't. And I didn't, but got older after that, and then I was able to go to the creek on my own more because I grew. But I thought of that incident a lot growing up. And then it sort of, incidents get buried. Then I was in college, and I grew to love poetry, which I still love. I love to read poetry, great poetry. And I was reading some Robert Frost, who became and is still one of my very favorite poets. And some of you may know Frost's work, and if you do know it, you're probably familiar with The Death of the Hired Man. It's a great narrative poem. And in that poem, he has a line which goes like this: "Home is the place where, when you go there, they have to take you in." And my mind flipped back at that when I read that to that incident when I was a boy, and I thought that's what I was feeling. That as yucky as it felt, and as much as I knew I was under the gun, and as wrong as it was, I knew Mother had to take me in, because that's just the way Mother was. It was home even so. And that is the way God is. Not because He has to be, but because He has declared to us that that's the way He wants to be. And He has promised us that whatever our situation, wherever we've been, to and fro, when we come to Him, it will be home territory, because by His very nature, He has to take us in. All right, come on in. I thought I told you 50 times, but I can tell you 51. Come on in. Which is not, as Paul used to say, and very wisely, not an excuse to do it 51 times, just because he detests God. We don't want to do that. The loving response is to cut it out. So whatever drew us away from home no longer keeps us from being at home. But still, if we do find ourselves in awkward positions of homelessness of one sort or another, God is the one to whom we go, who has to take us in, just because of the nature of who He is. And by His grace, we are received. So home is that place of where you are freely received, where you are safe amidst all of your ins and outs, ups and downs, good and bad, whatever, that you are safe and you're freely received. Now then we go from there to other things, but to begin with, you have a place. Home is that place. Think of Jesus in this in very poignant terms. We don't get a lot of information about how Jesus felt about being homeless during the years of His ministry, which He was, of course. He didn't have any place to root. He just went. So the next time you see somebody just wandering along and saying, oh, I wonder what's wrong with that person, say, I wonder how much like Jesus they are. They don't have a place either. But every once in a while we get this hint. Like when He says wistfully one day, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man, He has nowhere to lay His head. He could get pretty wistful about it, nostalgic about it. Or when He said, He went to Nazareth to preach in His home synagogue in the 4th chapter of Luke, and he was excited. He was just getting started. He was young. He was hopeful. He goes in there and opens one of the prophets, as Isaiah, and preaches from it, and he shares with his home folk, and then he sits down, and instead of saying, wow, that is really unique. How proud we are to have one so close to God come out of our little community. Instead of that, what do? That's Joseph's son? I don't think so. And they chased him out of town and tried to do him in, and somehow he managed to get away from them, but they were a very hostile crowd. And that's what led to, part of what led to this morning's verse about when he says, a prophet has no honor, is not without honor except at home. In a home, sometimes they forget conveniently how they helped make someone that was that solid and capable, because they don't want to live up to what He's challenging them to be. So He didn't come from here, when in fact He did. Now Jesus, I cannot imagine Jesus not waking up some mornings on His trek for 3 years and saying, oh man, I like just a good home-cooked meal and my own cot tonight. You know? Get away from these 12 clowns there. Oh, whoops, I could call those clowns. Well, I better get back to work. What happened with Jesus in that, though, if you watch it, is that he translated or transfigured all of this into something else. Since He didn't have a home per se in a physical sense anymore, though He's in the world, but not in the one place sense, He made home become an idea that had many different varieties of expression. So that He spent His life helping other people feel at home in ways they needed to feel at home. And by virtue of that, He drew Himself closer to them in a sharing family sense. And that's the nature of home that I want to talk about this morning, with the help in a minute of some stories that I'll share with you that I love, that I was given by a friend. Well, I want to talk about not so much that place that you're called home, though I am a very nostalgic person. I'm a mushy person. And all you have to do is mention some of my forebears and some of my history and some of where we're from and what's home to us in terms of having a stake in the land where we're from up in Alabama, and I just fall apart because I'm just made like that. But I know that home means more than that. As a maturing Christian, with a limited amount of time and space in this world to make my life imprint in, I know it's more than that. And I follow Jesus' lead in finding out what that more than that can be. And I want to challenge you and me to see that you and I can help other folks find home in a variety of ways at different parts of their lives, for different needs of their lives, and in so doing, stretch out the meaning of what it is to have a place to be safe and well received and freely received. That's what I want to do. That home is an internal attitude as much as it is an external place. To do that, I want to share with you several stories, all of which are about children and come out of the lives of children. Given to me by a dear friend some years ago. Several of these. And I want to help us all see how these can apply to what I'm trying to show as an expanded sense of what it is to have home and give home to others. Author Leo Buscaglia, some of you may have read from him, once talked about a contest he was asked to judge. The purpose of it was to find the most caring child. The winner was a 4-year-old whose next-door neighbor was an elderly gentleman who had recently lost his wife. Upon seeing the man cry, the little boy went into the old gentleman's yard, climbed onto his lap, and just sat there. When his mother asked him what he'd said to the neighbor, the little boy said, "Nothing. I just helped him cry." What he had done was give that old man a home for his grief, a place safe and well received to put his hurt, to put his loss. I can do that. You can do that. We can do that in the name of Jesus for others. Another story, a teacher of first graders discussing a picture of a family that she'd held up for all of them to see. What do you see in this picture? One little boy in the picture had a different color hair than all the rest of the family members, and so one child suggested that he must have been adopted, and a little girl said, "I know all about adoptions because I was adopted." "What does it mean to be adopted?" asked another child. "It means," said the girl who had been, "that you grew in your mommy's heart instead of her tummy." And so what she gave was a home for relationship instead of arrangement. The adoption, more than just an arrangement so that you'd have a place to be, it becomes an opening to a relationship that feeds, that nurtures, just as surely as if you had been the biological child of the family. Paul did write about our adoption as children of God, adopted sons and daughters of the Holy One. And he meant that to me, that we are brought into a relationship with God, sometimes against our own natural inclinations, sometimes after a period of time in which we have been lost or unseeing or too narrow, and God adopts us into his family, but he doesn't do so simply to call us his children. He does so to give us a relationship as a true father to his children. In a sense, we've all been adopted by God. Because if you go by the way we act, we should often seem like we would come from one so holy. I know I don't. I'm embarrassed the idea of holy. But he takes me anyway and grasps me in to the family. We can do that for other folks. We can adopt emotionally and spiritually and soulfully those we meet so that they feel a part of rather than excluded from something we are about or doing. Give them a home. Another. I was driving home from work one day and stopped to watch a local Little League baseball game that was being played in a park near my house. I sat down behind the bench on the first base line, and as I did so, I asked one of the boys what the score was. "We're behind 14-0. I've been there. Every team I was on was behind 14-0. I mean, had absolutely nothing to do with me, of course. Couldn't have, because I was on the bench. He answered with a smile, and I said, "Really? I have to say you don't look very discouraged." "Discouraged?" The boy asked with a look on his face. "Why should we be discouraged? We haven't even been up to bat yet." Now that boy gave a home in his heart to hope. And by so doing, became a contagion for others around him to pick up on that, and gave them reason to call hope something they could own. Why, we haven't even been to bat yet. We haven't even gotten started. This game's hardly gotten going. We can do that. We can say to someone who says, the odds are just too great. I've been down this road before. There's no hope at the end of it. And say to them, you haven't been down it with me. You haven't looked at it through my eyes. I'm going to help you see it another way. It's not 14-0. It's we hadn't been to bat yet. We can do that for others. And thus, in doing so, find a home for hope for ourselves. That's the beautiful thing about doing things like this. Jesus taught us this a million times. When you do these things, when you put yourself out like this to encourage others to find, in this case, home for various things they need to find home for in their lives, you become more acclimated to a sense of home in this world and being a part of his work and his will yourself. It redounds back on you, doesn't it? And on me. This. Whenever I'm disappointed with my spot in life, I stop and think about little Jamie Scott. Jamie was trying out for a part in a school play. His mother told me that he'd set his heart on being in it, though she feared he would not be chosen. On the day the parts were awarded, I went with her to get him after school. Jamie rushed up to her, eyes shining with pride and excitement. "Guess what, Mom?" he shouted. And then said words that have stayed with me, the writer says, for the rest of my life. "I've been chosen to clap and cheer." Sometimes people don't have home to feel at home in their own skin because we predetermine what they have to achieve in order to be worth it. We sometimes do it with our own children. Don't do that. I've made that mistake. Don't do that. When you do, correct it quickly. If you're a part of that which is happening, if you have something to contribute, a clap or a cheer, and not perhaps always a major role, celebrate the clap and the cheer. And include your children and others who are not just children, but the children of God, all of us, in that enthusiasm and in that excitement. We have a home in our own skin that feels right when we are encouraged to participate in something larger than ourselves, whatever it is, as long as it's wholesome, whatever it may be, and to whatever degree we're allowed to participate and whatever role we're set to play. And if pride doesn't get in the way and false bars are not set, we can live a healthy, whole, hopeful, and home-centered within self life because of the encouragement we give one another, for being grateful, for being a part of the family of God, doing anything we can to make it better, sweeter, richer, and more effective. A lesson in heart, this writer says, is my little 10-year-old daughter Sarah, born with a muscle missing in her foot and wears a brace all the time. She came home one beautiful day to tell me she had competed in field day. That's where they have these lots of races and other competitive events. I remember those too painfully from my elementary years. Field day. I was always on the blue team, and they had blues and golds at West Lawn School in Mobile. And I was always on the blue team, and the blue team always lost. And I never quite got why should they keep putting me back on the blue team. Why don't you be a gold for once? And then, like, I could at least clap and cheer like that other kid. You know, never get that. So I have a little bitterness coming out in this. It's okay. I'm just kidding. Because of her leg support, my mind raced as I tried to think of encouragement for my Sarah. Things I could say to her about not letting this get her down and, you know, all that. But before I could utter a word, she said, "Daddy, I won 2 of the races." Well, I couldn't believe it. And then she said, "I had an advantage." I knew it. I thought she must have been given a head start, some kind of physical advantage that they gave to her, and so forth and so on. But again, before I could say anything about it, she said, Daddy, I didn't get a head start. My advantage was that I had to try harder from the beginning. That was my advantage. They didn't have to try as hard as I did. That's a plus for me. She gives a home to never say die. She gives a home to extra effort. She gives a home to human spirit, greater than human position and human physical capacity. If we try and have to try harder than the next person to get something or to understand something or to be a part of something, it can be an advantage if we see it such. Because we dig harder, we want it more, and it comes home to us deeper when we get there. I've always thought that God had a little extra preference for the underdog. Of course, I was a Mets fan for many years in the 60s, and that had a lot to do with it. I was a Braves fan before they ever got good. And then when they got good, I didn't care anymore. So, it's just... So I've been through some of that. But it is true. It is true that those with that spirit of, no, that's an advantage. I'll work with that. God will work with me in that. We'll move from here to there because of that. Rather than, I'm done. That's giving a home to power, a home to change, a home to integrity in living life. And it can affect not only those who have it and express it, it can affect all of those around them. And now, finally, this one brings right into the core of our living and our serving and our being every single day, our potential power to be home givers to people in need of such in a variety of ways. One of the most powerful stories I know along these lines. It is from an eyewitness account in New York City, from a December cold day not too long ago. The eyewitness then writes, I saw a little boy, 10 years old, roughly, seemed, standing before a shoe store by himself on the roadway in the city, barefooted, peering through the window and shivering with cold. A lady approached the boy as I watched. She said, my little fellow, why are you looking so earnestly in that window? He said, I was asking God to give me a pair of shoes. The lady took him by the hand, went into the store, asked the clerk to get a half-dozen pair of socks for the boy. She then asked if he could give her, the store clerk could give her, a basin of water and a towel. He did. She took the little fellow to the back of the store, and removing her gloves, she knelt down, washed his little feet, dried them with a towel. By this time, the clerk had returned with the socks, so she put a pair of those on his feet, then bought him a pair of shoes and put those on his feet, tied up the remaining pairs of socks that were new and yet unused, and gave them to him, patted him on the head and said, no doubt, my little fellow, you feel more comfortable now. She turned to go. He grabbed her hand, spun her around, looked her in the face, and said, are you God's wife? Look, we whine and moan about all the world's issues. I do the same thing. This can't be done. That can't be done. We can't move this mountain. We can't move that mountain. There is somebody every single day in our path, or somewhat frequently like that, who comes into our path, who just needs us to act toward them as though we were the spouse of God. As though we were the homekeeper and homemaker paired with God in the home of the human family. and would treat them as we would anyone under our care, children we had birthed, those we had taken in, so that everything that they lacked that was a legitimate lack, food, shelter, clothing, yes, but love, attention, patience, understanding, and on it goes. Those things too. Those things are given as though we were in a spousal relationship with the Almighty God. A co-partner in the human home, bringing as many people in and bringing as much of Christ to our elder brother in the home to bear upon those folks as we possibly, with God's help, can. There is no reason that I can think of, though I'd love to think of 25 of them, but I can't honestly this morning think of a good reason why I can't be more like that. How about you? Home. It is where the heart is. If the heart is just encased with Jesus, then home is a much larger concept than where we abide and where we go at the end of the day. And each and every day, we can make this world a bit more of a home in a relevant way to varieties of people we meet, given their needs. May God call you into this kind of home-based love and identity with his other brothers and sisters, with his other children, our brothers and sisters.